beautiful people of the internet. How are you doing today? I surely hope that you are on fire because today I'm going to be talking about one of the most powerful poems I've ever read, and I hope you're ready for it. The poem I want to talk about today is called Power by Audre Lorde. Let's get started with introducing who Audre Lorde was and what her writings was about. Audre Lorde was a 20th century American poet, African American poet. She was someone who could be described as a feminist, as a lesbian, black mother, as a poet who talked about social injustice, whether it's racism, whether it's homophobia, whether it's classism. She was someone who addressed these head on and she was not afraid to say her piece. Audre Lorde was born in New York to West Indian immigrant parents. She went to Catholic school. She got her BA from Hunter College. She got an MA from Columbia. And a very interesting thing about Audre Lorde that I've always loved was that when she was a child, she used to memorize poetry and she would recite it to people when they were talking to her. So when people talked to her and the feeling that she was trying to say would remind her of a poem, she would start reciting that poem. And I like that. And she would often say that when she got to a point where she didn't find a poet or a poem that could express what she was trying to say, that's where she started writing poetry. And I just love her for that. Her poem Power was first published in 1978, and it is about a police shooting of a 10-year-old black kid in Queens. Lorde said that she wrote this poem after she discovered that the officer who shot the kid was found not guilty, and this poem is her reaction to that. And without further ado, let's read the poem. Usually I like to read the whole poem through before I dissect it, but because this poem is a little long, I'm just gonna go right to dissecting it. If you would like to read the poem before listening to the video, please feel free to stop. I will leave a link down below. Go ahead, read the poem, kind of have your own thoughts, think about it on your own, and then come back and join us so we can dissect it together. Power by Audre Lorde. The difference between poetry and rhetoric is being ready to kill yourself instead of your children. I would like to first draw attention to the fact that this poem is called Power. This is a poem about a helpless 10-year-old child, about black people living in America, about the injustice that they have to suffer through. And to have a poem called Power about such a powerless group of people at that time, and especially in this situation, I feel like that's very important to note. Lorde starts her poem by comparing poetry and rhetoric to the differences between being ready to kill yourself and your children. And from the get-go, we get this feeling that she is going to be using very harsh imagery. It's the metaphors that's going to put you on edge, and that is what poetry does. Poetry is using big metaphors to send a message, to send her roar, her anger that will clearly come through this poem, and she just puts the audience in perspective. She's telling you, the audience who's reading this poem, this is what I'm going to do, so be ready for my poem. I am trapped on a desert of raw gunshot wounds, and a dead child dragging his shattered black face off the edge of my sleep. Blood from his punctured cheeks and shoulders is the only liquid for miles, and my stomach churns at the imagined taste while my mouth splits into dry lips, without loyalty or reason, thirsting for the wetness of his blood, as it sinks into the whiteness of the desert where I am lost without imagery or magic, trying to make power out of hatred and destruction, trying to heal my dying son with kisses. Only the sun will bleach his bones quicker. Honestly, I get chills reading this poem every single time. So Audre Lorde starts by setting the scene, which is the murder scene of the 10-year-old child. She's describing being trapped on a desert. She is describing the dead child. She's describing his blood that's sinking into her, his punctured cheeks. And of course, as she said, as she promised us in the beginning, the imagery she uses is very much brutal, and it's right there in your face. It's very much alive, and it's just raw and bloodthirsty. And I like this line where she says, as it sinks into the whiteness of the desert where I am lost. Here we go back to the fact that she was trapped in a desert. This desert that is described as white. I always enjoy it when poets describe things as odd things, because deserts are gold, they're yellow, they're not typically white. But of course, Audre Lorde, this metaphorical desert she's describing right now, is the whiteness, it's the white supremacy, it's this unfair world where white police cop gets away with killing a 10-year-old child. That's the evil in her eyes, not the real desert. She says, without imagery or magic trying to make power out of hatred and destruction. Here, this is a clear reference to the fact that she called the poem Power. Power is what she's trying to do. It is this poem that she's constructing out of hatred and this horrible act, this horrid event that happened. She's trying to make power out of that. And how is she going to do that without magic or imagery? She said she's trying to heal my dying son. Obviously the kid who died is not her son, but he is her son in a way. He is everybody's son, and by saying my son, it's a personal fight. She's trying to heal him with her kisses. This is very intimate, this is very immediate, that she's trying to put us in this very closed space. She says only the sun will bleach his bones quicker. Bleach here can be also interpreted in the fact that bleach makes things white. This is a bad thing. Whiteness is the evil in this poem. The poem continues. A policeman who shot down a 10-year-old in Queens stood over the boy with his cop shoes in childish blood, and a voice said, "Die, you little motherfucker," and there are tapes to prove it. At his trial, this policeman said in his own defense, "I didn't notice the size nor nothing else, only the color, and there are tapes to prove that too." In this part of the poem, Audre Lorde does not hide behind metaphors and imagery anymore. She's very blunt at the way she describes the murder, the way the act went down, at describing the boy and with his cop shoes in childish blood. It's very interesting that she describes blood as childish. And she says at his trial, the policeman, at his own defense, said, "I didn't notice the size nor anything else, only the color." And he said that in his defense, and it's just mind-blowing to me that he thinks that he can get away with saying that he didn't notice anything, only the color, as if the color is something to justify what he did, as if the color, regardless of size or age or anything else, is justifiable in committing this murder. And she says, and there are tapes to prove that too. She's telling this policeman that what you're doing is clearly horrible. This is not something to say in your defense. This is something to condemn you even further. How can you not see it? She goes on. Today, that 37-year-old white man with 13 years of police forcing was set free by 11 white men who said they were satisfied, justice had been done, and one black woman who said, "They convinced me," meaning they had dragged her 4'10" black woman's frame over the hot coals of 4 centuries of white male approval until she let go the first real power she ever had and lined her own womb with cement to make a graveyard of our children. In this part, she talks about the fact that the white man was not condemned. He is 37-year-old. She's clearly talking about the numbers here. The numbers mean a lot. He's 37. The boy is still 10. He served 30 years in the police force, and he was set free by 11 white men. These 11 white men said that justice has been served. For them, justice is served by not condemning the person who has killed a 10-year-old child. Even worse than that, she talks about this black woman, which we can understand is his mother, as she referenced the womb. This woman who was convinced that it's okay that her child was murdered and that's fine, the man was not guilty. This is horrible that they can convince a woman that her child died in such a horrid act, and she's okay with it. This just goes to prove that the oppression goes way deeper than we could ever realize. She's describing this woman whose body is being dragged over hot coals of 4 centuries of white male approval, and she talks about the fact that this is a woman who, for the first time in her life, she has real power. She's in a position where she should protest, where she should say, "No, this is not justice." but she's fine with it. She lined her womb with cement. Imagine the imagery that she uses here, like a womb being closed on by cement to make a graveyard of our children. It's very interesting the fact that she says our children, not her child, because obviously this is the woman's child, but she makes it, again, an intimate thing. She makes it a private thing by including everybody. This is not about this one woman who was convinced. This is about all of us. This is about our community, our children. The poem goes on. I have not been able to touch the destruction within me. But unless I learn to use the difference between poetry and rhetoric, my power too will run corrupt as poisonous mold, or lie limp and useless as an unconnected wire. And one day I will take my teenaged plug and connect it to the nearest socket, raping an 85-year-old woman who is somebody's mother. And as I beat her senseless and set a torch to her bed, a Greek chorus will be singing 3 out of 4 times. Poor thing, she never hurt a soul. What beasts they are. In this section of the poem, Audre Lorde talks about herself again. The poem is about herself yet again. She talks about this destruction within her, this hatred. And I feel like if you grow up with injustice, and even if you don't grow up, I mean, if everybody has inner ugly within them, but especially if you grow up oppressed, if you grow up in a society where injustice is clear cut in front of you and there's nothing you can do about it, if you grow up feeling helpless, feeling powerless to this horrible thing that you're watching in front of your eyes, there's always going to be an angry part of you. The poem ends on a very curious note. She talks about how she's going to snap one of those days and rape an 85-year-old white woman. And again, with the age and the number, an 85-year-old white woman is someone who you could relate to with helplessness, with someone who needs help, with someone who couldn't possibly hurt anybody. And she mentions that she is somebody's mother. She says that in this possible future, she will beat her senseless, she would set her bed on fire, and what people will say, poor thing, talking about the mother, poor thing, she never hurt a soul. What beasts they are. Beasts they are, meaning the black people, meaning the African American people, that they're always cast out as beasts. But if the situation was reversed, as it was in the shooting, the white man comes out clean and not guilty. If I can say something, that I might be as audacious as to say that me and Audre Lorde have something in common, in the sense that I've always felt that poetry spoke for me. Poetry was something that I turned to when I couldn't find the words to express myself. Poetry is something that put words in a beautiful and powerful way when I myself couldn't say anything. If words failed me, poetry was always kind of there for me. And watching the news lately and seeing the word, it made me think about this poem a lot, and I really didn't have anything to say. I couldn't find words to just express what I'm trying to say. Even now I feel like words fail me, but I've been thinking about this poem a lot lately, and I feel like this poem is what I want to shout at the world. This is the poem that I want to say when I hear this stuff, when I see that this is our reality. This poem is the one thing that I kept thinking about, and I wanted to share this poem with you. I don't really have anything to say about it because I really don't know what to say about it, but clearly Audre Lorde knew what to say about it back in the 70s, and it's still valid today, so this poem is important to read. Please, I urge you to share this poem with people around you. I urge you to read it and reread it, to remember it, to see the graphic imagery in it, and to cherish it, to yell it at the top of your lungs, because it's important to use our words, our poetry, our metaphors to speak our piece. And that's all I'm gonna say for today. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, as that would mean a lot to me, and thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Salam.